Imagine this, going camping into the wilderness with a friend, and while camping, being abducted by a UFO alien. Today we talk to author, abductee Terry Lovelace about his 1977 encounter and abduction at Devil's Den State Park, Arkansas. And after a fall in visiting the emergency room in 2012, and just having a routine x-ray to his leg, discovering two anomalous objects. Got you on the edge of your seats? Well, let's find out. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Please welcome to the Truth Be Told studios, Terry Lovelace.
Tony, thanks very much for that kind introduction. I appreciate that very much.
Of course. I think after your abduction, you at least get that, right?
I think I deserve that, yeah.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. Again, we're really going to promote today not only your book but your lecture and workshop coming up at Contact in the Desert. It's going to be on June 25th through 28th, and you can go to the website, get your tickets, get your passes, and we're going to talk about your incident at Devil's Den, and then some other amazing topics that you're going to present to the virtual conference this year. So I'm excited to see that and be a part of that. But for a lot of people out there that may not know your story, I would love to hear your story on how this happened, because you were a former military, you had a really good job, and back in the 70s when you said I was even see an alien or see a UFO, people looked at you nuts. I couldn't imagine saying I got abducted. So tell us your story.
Sure. I graduated from high school in St. Louis, Missouri in 1973, and I joined the United States Air Force on a 6-year enlistment. I was a medic, EMT, first responder, and worked at Whiteman Air Force Base in western Missouri for the whole 6 years. I worked a night shift, 11 o'clock p.m. to 8 a.m. Background-wise, just real quick, I finished my enlistment in 1979,
Wow.
Finished an undergraduate degree in psychology, and attended law school at Western Michigan, completed my degree and took the bar exam, and was in private practice for a while. And then I was offered a position with as Assistant Attorney General for the United States Territory of American Samoa, and was down there for a while. Beautiful place, beautiful people.
Oh my gosh,
The only
sounds
U.S. territory south of the equator, 2,500 miles south of Hawaii, just a beautiful little island. Great place to have a job.
Right. I wouldn't complain.
From there. Oh, it was beautiful. Moved from there to Vermont, where I finished my legal career, but and retired in 2012. And yeah, I could never speak of this with anyone except my wife. I never trusted anyone enough to share it with them, because had that leaked out, that would have been the end of my nice government job for sure, and it would have cost me the respect of my peers in the legal community. And I think even if I published my book 5 years earlier, it wouldn't have been as well received as it has been now. I think times are changing.
For sure.
That's on a really fast trajectory, and it's going to be an exciting year.
It has been, and I think like Ancient Aliens and MUFON bringing in Hangar One and so many different TV shows, I think it really not opened the eyes for people, but I think gave people permission to tell their own stories, because so many people either have an abduction story or a witnessed a UFO, but again, they just never felt comfortable coming out and saying, this is my story. And so I think all of a sudden it became so popular on television, and Giorgio and Eric Von Daniken, all these people became celebrities, not just known in the ufology community, but they became celebrities. And I think it's helped people like you to say, listen, okay, now we want to hear your story, and especially very specific story.
Yeah, I agree with that. Times have changed, for the good, for the better.
Right. Well,
So
tell us about 1977. I want to
sure
hear
will.
this.
I sure will. So in 1977, we were working the night shift, my friend Tobias and I, in the emergency room. And it was a quiet evening, and we were playing hearts because there was nothing to do. And he said, "Hey, man, I got an idea. Let's go camping." And I'm like, "Camping? Are you nuts?" I mean, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm a city boy. He was a city boy from Flint, Michigan. I knew I'd never been camping, and I really highly suspected he'd never been camping. But he had a good argument, and that was that he was just obsessed with the night sky and wanted to be an astronomer. That was his career plan. And he could point out galaxies, name constellations, and even time when satellites would come over. So he wanted to go to a place to try camping. We were both married at the time. I was 22, he was 23. He had a couple of small kids. So we thought if we went down and liked it, it'd be some cheap way to get out and have some recreation without having to spend a ton of money, because we didn't have a ton of money. So, and he knew that I was into photography. I had a little darkroom set up, made my own black and white prints. And he knew that I wanted to photograph wildlife. And we both lived on the base. And Whiteman was a SAC base back then, Strategic Air Command Base, with nuclear ICBMs spread out all over the countryside. And what do you call it? The bombers, the large nuclear bombers, B-52s.
Oh, B-52s, yeah.
Stratofortresses, yeah. Squadron of them. So when you live on a nuclear base, there's not a lot you can do with your camera. So,
right.
so it was a good idea to get away. I mean, there were a lot of nice parks close to us, and Devil's Den was a 6.5-hour drive. But he explained, hey, isn't a road trip kind of part of the adventure? And I had to kind of agree with that. And we did all our preparation. We did everything. I'm going to cut through a lot here to get to the important part, and made the drive 6 hours south to Devil's Den State Park, just across the Arkansas border. And we made an agreement that we would not stay in the campground. If we stayed in the campground, we'd have, people to the right of us, people to the left of us. There'd be kids and other undesirables running around. And, we didn't want that. We wanted to be real outdoorsmen, right? And he had heard that there was this elevated plateau back in the woods. The top of the plateau was level with the treetops. So unless you're right up on it, it's invisible. But he was hopeful we could find this place. And we trespassed across a locked chain across the road. And to get back in there, we thought it was a nature preserve. It's actually federally owned land. And not part of Devil's Den State Park at all. But that's what we did. And we drove in, and by happenstance, we found this place and drove up the steep dirt road incline and crested the hill. And it was just a beautiful meadow spread out in front of us. And we set up a little campsite by the tree line. And we went out, we did all the stuff that's fun when you camp, because it was new to us. We'd never done it before. That's it. That's where we stayed. And what's curious is that that picture is only a couple of years old. That is exactly the way we found it. If you blow that picture up, you don't have to. You can see it really pretty much the way it is. You can see white lines that go back and forth. Those are from a tractor pulling what's called a brush hog.
Oh, yeah.
The federal government pays for the gas and for an employee to go up there every few weeks and clear cut that. And that's a lot of taxpayer gas for 50 years. And I just wonder what the reason for that is.
That is curious.
So yeah, we set up and we were on these air mattresses, just kind of kicked back. We had a campfire between us and a tent in back of us. And we're just having a nice evening and carrying on chat. It's about probably 9:00 p.m. And this sounds so cliche, I almost hate to say it, but it's true. And other people have told me that they've experienced the same thing. And that was that the forest went completely silent. I mean, just a few minutes earlier, there was a lull in our conversation. And I noticed that all the crickets, the tree frogs, the stuff in the forest that makes sound, had all gone quiet. And it was weird too, in that we had enjoyed a nice breeze. This was June. We had enjoyed a nice breeze, and that had stopped. And things were not only quiet, they were still. And it unnerved me. And it didn't seem to bother my friend at all. And I asked him, of course, like he's going to know,
Right.
you know, hey, is this normal? And he's like, yeah, don't worry about it. You know, the bugs will be back. We just, you know, we've been laughing and been loud, and we've just quieted them. They'll come back. Don't worry about that. But I had trouble shaking that. And we carried on some conversation, and he is fixed. At this point, he's fixated with his head turned to the left, which would have been toward the western horizon. And I'm about to ask him, hey, man, what are you looking at? And he asked me first. He said, Terry, were those lights there before?
Oh, wow.
And that struck me as odd, because I knew there were no lights. The only light we could see was a dim white glow on the eastern horizon where the park's campgrounds were. But other than that, there were no lights. There was nothing out there, especially back in 1977. There may be some things closer now, but back then, man, this was a remote location. And I couldn't see from where I was sitting because of his torso was in the way. So I had stood up, and on the horizon, I saw this triangle of 3 little stars packed in a tight little triangle, each one the same size and the same brightness. And they were too far above the horizon to have been like from a train or a parking lot or something. And they just looked out of place. And I thought, you know, maybe it's an aircraft headed in our direction, and because its heading is right directly toward us, we can't actually detect the motion until it deviates its course by a degree or two, and then we'll see it move. So we're watching it, and Toby's arguing, I don't know of any aircraft that has that kind of light configuration. I didn't either, really, but we're watching this thing, and it rotated. It turned like it were on an axis.
Oh, wow.
And rotated about 120 degrees and aligned the base of the triangle parallel with the horizon. And as soon as it did that, it started an ascent. It went straight up. And about this time, I felt this odd sensation of calm wash over me, where I had been unnerved and anxious, you know, about the forest becoming so quiet abruptly. All that anxiety was gone. And I was in a weird place. And I think my friend, I don't think I know my friend was in the exact same place. And we watched. And, you know, we weren't really even stunned. I mean, our emotions were muted. And I think this speaks to the level of influence that these things can have over us. I mean, normal human reaction would have been, I mean, for us to validate each other's story, hey, are you seeing what I'm seeing? What do you think this thing is? You know, either that or freaking out and loading up the car and getting out of there. But there was none of that. There was just, I felt more like an observer than a participant, and almost mildly disinterested. And we watched this thing climb into the sky and reach what I call the ceiling. I'm guessing maybe 10,000 feet or so. I really don't have a good point of reference, so it's an assumption. And then it changed orientation. It went straight up with the 3, so we could see the 3 dots. And it went up, and when it reached the ceiling, it went sideways and changed orientation to flat, so it was parallel with the ground. And then it began a slow glide plane in our direction. We knew it was coming in our direction because we could see the point of the apex of the triangle and then the 2 lights in the rear. And as it got lower, those lights dimmed, and it did something unusual. As it's gliding down, it did this somersault-like thing where the front of the point of the triangle tipped down and under, and it did a complete somersault. And it did that twice. And just like Commander Fravor was talking about how the Tic Tac thing that he saw during the Nimitz carrier incident, he said that the thing mimicked him, you know, followed his trail and just kind of mimicked him and let him know that he was there. And that's exactly the vibe that I got from it, was this somersault thing that it did was its way of telling us, hey, we're not out of control. you know, we're doing this with intention and this is intelligently operated. I know that's a big assumption to make, but that's the thought that I had. And it glided in, and as it glided in, it got bigger. And as it got bigger, it passed through stars of fields of stars, and they black out for a moment as it went past and then blink back on when it was on the other side. So we knew we were looking at one solid object and not, you know, three lights moving in unison.
Right.
And it leveled off at about 5,000 feet. And we were on top of the horizon, which was level with the treetops, as I stated. And this thing glided in at about, it descended some more and was at about 3,000 feet when it glided in, and it's made an abrupt stop directly over this meadow, this almost triangular shaped meadow. And it was enormous. It was a city block long on each leg of the triangle.
Wow. That's huge.
Yeah, it was huge. It was huge. It filled that entire area. And thankfully, we had camped off to the side by the tree line. So had we camped in the middle, we'd have been right underneath the thing, and that would have been uncomfortable. But you know, neither one of us were afraid. We had no fear, no anxiety, no nothing. We just laid there and watched this thing play out. And what it did was it shined some lights down at us. It shined first down about a 6-inch in diameter white light that had the quality of like a high power searchlight cutting through fog. You know, you can see a white column of light.
Right.
This light had that quality, but of course there was no fog. And that light turned on like someone hits a switch, and it lands in the middle of our campfire. And I look at it, Toby looks at it, we look at each other, and we're just like, That lasted, like I say, 60 seconds, and then it abruptly turned off. And then there was a laser that came from the same point, the middle of the triangle and underneath. And it was so high that we really couldn't see the sides at this point. All we could see was the bottom. And I'd seen lasers. This was 1977. I'd seen lasers on television, but
I was going to ask you about
real
that.
life.
I was going to ask you about that. I was like, did you watch Star Wars?
Yeah, no, you know, yeah, I'd seen one on TV, and
Right.
this was about the diameter of, you know, a pen or a pencil.
Right.
So it wasn't real tiny, and it would hit the campsite at a location for a millisecond and then move to another location, so that in the course of you know, a second, it would be 5 or 6, maybe 10 places all over the campsite, and it hit everything that we brought, including ourselves. It struck me in the chest a couple of times. I never felt a thing. It hit my friend Toby. It hit our tent, my car, his backpack, the Coleman cooler, all the stuff that we brought with us. And I thought, this thing's checking us out.
I was going to say, what do you think it was scanning for? What reason? What do you, just to see what's
it was
going
identifying us, I think.
Okay.
What we are, who we are, you know, what we're doing, maybe even knowing our intentions. But yeah, it was definitely checking us out. That lasted for maybe 2 minutes or so, and then it shut off like someone hit a switch again. And we sat there, and it's still dead silent out. And my that feeling of calm, that almost sedated feeling that I had, transitioned abruptly to sleepy. And suddenly I was so sleepy. All I wanted to do was to go in that tent and lay down and go to sleep. Now, remember, we've got this thing that's 3,000 feet almost over our heads, you know, that just gave us this light show. And yeah, our actions were inappropriate to what was going on. So my friend stood up and he said, "Show's over." That was the first bit of conversation we had, and you know, since this thing began. And he dragged his tent over, or pardon me, he dragged his air mattress over to the tent, tossed it in, fell on top of it, and was out. And I followed suit. I didn't bother to take off my shirt or my shoes. My unlaced, I wore combat boots. I didn't unlace them at all, which will come into play in a minute. And I fell on top of this air mattress, and I was out. But I don't think I was asleep. I think I was unconscious. And while we were unconscious, that's when they took us.
Oh, wow. Now, did you feel, you said you didn't feel any fear or excitement other than just more observing them as they're observing you. to be able to just fall asleep after that, I think most people would be like going through your head of like, oh my gosh, what just happened? Did that happen at all, or is it just like I'm out?
Yeah, it's not normal human behavior.
Yeah.
It's just not. And the whole time we're watching this thing, Toby has his camera in his backpack a foot away from him. And the thought never occurred to either of us to take a picture of this thing. And that just blows my mind.
Yeah, nowadays, everybody have their phones out.
Yeah, well, I was into photography, so
That's true,
I was
yeah.
that guy that annoyed everybody, took pictures of everything, and the thought never occurred to me. I woke up some hours later. We later would determine, in retrospect, it was about an hour before daylight when this happened. But I woke up to these intense flashing lights. They were yellow and white and orange and very intense like an old school flash bulb from a camera. The kind that would leave you with seeing blue dot in front of your face every time you blinked.
Right.
And that intensity, and it would light up the inside of that tent for a millisecond, just insanely. And that woke me up, and I didn't have my wits about me. And I woke up and I thought, where am I? And I'm like, oh yeah, Toby and I were camping. And I saw these lights, and I'm trying to rationalize what they could be. And I'm thinking, these got to be the overhead, lights on a park ranger's truck there to kick us out, because we knew we were trespassing. And then I heard this low droning sound that wasn't so much audibly loud. It was more powerful.
Right.
Like if you've ever stood next to a large piece of industrial machinery, you can feel the power from it. And I felt that. And then I thought, well, a park ranger running a generator in the back of the truck, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And then I looked down and I saw that my boots had been unlaced, almost all the way down. And still I had no fear, but my boots being unlaced annoyed me, because I knew I would not have gone to bed with them like that. I would have either taken them off or I'd left them tightly laced, like I know that I did. Because if something happened and we needed to run out of the tent for whatever reason, that would be a terrible trip hazard. I just wouldn't do it that way. So I pulled off my boots, and my socks are on sideways.
On sideways?
Sideways.
That's interesting, yeah.
I would not have done that either.
Right.
And it didn't occur to us at this time that we'd have been undressed and redressed. That came later. So I tied my boots up properly, put my socks on correctly, and I got to my knees. A small little tent, and my friend is to my left, and he's focused on looking at something through his flap on the tent on his side. And I ask him, Toby, man, what are you looking at? And he does this, shh, I think they're still out there. And I'm like, who's still out there, Toby? Is it park rangers? And in one of these flashes of white light, I saw that there were tracks of tears down the right side of his face, because when that white light flashed, I guess the saline in the tears fluoresced against his dark skin, and I could see this white line. And that raised my level of fear from probably a 0 to a level of 2, because that concerned me, because I couldn't imagine what would make this guy cry. So I got on my knees and moved forward and pulled back the flap of the tent on my side. And this thing that was 3,000 feet over our heads when we went to bed had descended and is now 30 feet over this meadow. And thankfully, it's offset from us by just a little bit. And it also gave us an opportunity to see the side of the thing, which otherwise we wouldn't have been able to see. And it was deep. It was like 5 stories deep. So it wasn't, a single story, it wasn't made at Boeing. I'll put it that way.
Right.
And that unnerved me. That raised my level of fear. And then I saw what I took to be a dozen, maybe 15 little kids, children, wandering around in this field. And I'm like, Toby, man, what are these kids doing out here in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere? And he said, man, Terry, look at them. Look close. They ain't kids. They're not human beings. And then he said, don't you remember They took us and they hurt us.
Oh, so he remembered.
He remembered. He remembered. He knew, which is why he was crying. And my level of fear then jumped from a 2 to a 10. And I was absolutely, oh my gosh, I had never been so scared in my entire life. And I was terrified that either one of us would cough or sneeze or do something to draw their attention, and they'd make their way over toward us. Now, this is a big meadow, and they're a fair distance away. But still, we're absolutely terrified because we have no idea they're long done with us, right? And so I'm watching these things, and in the flashes of light, I could see them in silhouette, but in the flashes of light, I could get kind of a decent look at them, and they were typical grays with large heads, thin torsos, long spindly limbs, and they had a really unique gait when they walked. It was like their knees were hinged to move backward with each step. So it looked like they were dragging their foot behind them when they made each step forward. It's difficult to explain, but it was unique. And while we're watching them, they're just kind of meandering around. They're not looking at the ground like looking for something. They're looking around like they're tourists or something. And then this light kicks on from the same spot underneath this triangle in the center, and it's another column of white light, but this one is about 30 feet in diameter. I say that because it was about as broad as this thing was tall off the floor of the meadow. And it appeared to be a cylinder of white light. And as soon as that kicked on, all these little guys turned their attention toward it. And they're all broken up into pairs and threes, and they start walking toward this thing. And when the first two little guys stepped into the light, they were in it for maybe 20 seconds, and they would pixelate out and just be gone. And then the next 2 or 3 would step into the light, and then likewise 20 seconds or so, they'd be gone. And we watched this until the last 2 little guys were gone, and then the light shut off. And when it did, that droning noise that I described earlier, that mechanical noise, stopped. And we'd been hearing that for long enough that it had become like a bass line, so that when it kicked off, it was it was just silence again.
So what did you think? Because a lot of times you hear of UFOs, no noise at all. What do you think the noise was? What was the noise from?
It had to come from the triangle somewhere.
Right.
And we heard no noise whatsoever
when
it was over our heads the evening before. When it glided in, it was dead silent.
Right.
So I don't know what this noise was associated with, but it was powerful. And as I said, it was more a noise that you felt in your chest rather than heard audibly with your ear canals. It was just strange. And we watched this thing after the little guys were all gone. The light kicked off, and we saw it take off. And it didn't, take off like a rocket ship. It just lifted off and went straight up and turned a little bit and continued to go straight up. And we saw 3 points of light, and then 1 point of light, and then it was gone. And we were so terrified. We sat in that tent for probably 40 minutes, like 2 scared little 10-year-olds. I was afraid to leave the tent. All I had for cover was a piece of canvas over my head, but I felt I'd be vulnerable if I ran 60 feet to the car, and I didn't want to risk that. And my friend was like, "We got to get out of here. Let's go now." And to this day, I can't cut across an open field
without that.
I can't do it. I'll walk 1.5 miles around rather than cut through an open field, because
I have to say, in an open field, it is kind of a creepy feeling when you do get out in the middle, and in general. So,
I left this with a few phobias. And
right.
We both left this changed people. I think we went down there like as teenagers, and we left there as certified adults. We were 2 different people when we left.
I asked this of Chris Bledsoe, that we hear a lot about people that have been abducted. Either they've been abducted as children or even family members. It's kind of a generational thing. Have you, once you finally spoke the truth, did you find out if somebody in your family, or maybe Toby, maybe he the one that, since he was so interested in the stars, was he the one that they were after in the first place? You just happened to be there. Did you ever figure that out?
Well, that's a great question, because I got to tell you, we left there feeling like we'd kept an appointment. I know that sounds weird, but that's
Yeah.
the feeling that we had. And as far as the familial connection, when I decided to write the book, like I say, I hadn't told a soul other than my wife until 2012. In 2012, when they X-rayed my leg and they found those anomalies, that. And then the one above my knee, that's about the size of a fingernail with 2 wires running up. That's obviously a manufactured, I won't say man-made, but a manufactured item. I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned. And that brought back, I normally would have a nightmare. I mean, a screaming bad nightmare once or twice a year, for 40 some years. It was just, my wife we've been together 45 years, and she expected that would happen every now and then. And, it was just something that you get through.
How often did you and Toby talk about this? Or did you lose contact with him, or did you keep in touch?
I did lose contact with him, which is not uncommon.
Really?
I bet you've heard of Robert Hastings,
Mm-hmm.
who wrote UFOs and Nukes. And Robert and I are friends, and we talk a lot. And he told me, and then I was able to verify this because I became an inadvertent UFO investigator.
Right.
But he said that the armed forces will separate 2 guys that have an experience. They'll go in different directions. They'll transfer one to another base and one to another, and they'll never have contact again. They'll see to that. My friend Toby was shipped to Japan. They cut orders for him at light speed. I mean, he was out of there in a few weeks. And we were ordered by the base commander to have no contact. I was
Really?
told, yes, I was told, as I was in the exam room, because we were both hurt. I had probably the worst sunburn I'd ever had in my life. But I never blistered and I never peeled. The real problem that we had, we were both acutely dehydrated. And we both had what the doctors called flash burns to our eyes. That's what like an arc welder would get if they didn't pull the hood down with the smoked glass.
Mm-hmm.
And that's very painful. It makes you very photophobic. Light just kills your eyes. So it was a long ride home.
So what was that conversation like going home? Was it silent? Was it, because like you said, you weren't fearful until after the incident of the abduction. You felt very comfortable before. So, but you also said you were very, like, you met the appointment that you felt like that was supposed to happen. So what was that conversation? Did you say, hey, let's keep this to ourselves, let's tell our superiors? What did you say?
The conversation was not typical. It wasn't what 2 people would talk about if they had just witnessed something of this magnitude and gone through some kind of traumatic experience. I think human nature is that you want to validate each other's experience. You want to talk about it, and that's it. And we didn't do that. Yeah, if you look at this photograph, and you look at the lower, on the left side below, you'll see my drawing of a car, 2 figures in our tent.
Right.
And I did that to try to give it some kind of perspective. This was drawn in 1977, by the way, not many weeks after the event, when things were still fresh in my memory. I kept a notebook. I kept a diary of everything that had happened to us. And that was immensely helpful to write the book and be able to have some recall. But back to your question about the conversation. Things had changed between us. And I couldn't reconcile that then, and I don't know how to reconcile that today. I mean, here this guy was. We had worked together for 3 years. We were best of friends. Our wives were best of friends. On our days off, we might get together and barbecue at one house or the other,
Right.
Play cards, play volleyball, do something. And I suddenly didn't want anything to do with the guy.
Really?
And I don't get that. And I think he was in the same frame of mind. And like I say, we were ordered to have no contact. I was ordered by the hospital commander, and he was very formal. He said, Sergeant Lovelace, you'll have no contact with Sergeant Tobias in any way, shape, or form. You can't speak to him verbally. You can't write him a letter. You can't contact him through third parties. He's not to give you anything. You're not to accept anything from him, and on and on and on. And he said, and that's an order, Sergeant, and if you disobey my order, there'll be consequences. Do you understand? And I said, well, yes, sir. And I did. I mean, I understood consequences, but I didn't understand the reasoning behind it.
I was going to say, us civilians would say, why? Why would you want me not to speak with him? But when you're in the military, you know not to question your superiors.
Yeah, I didn't have that option.
Yeah.
So, but we did have the presence of mind. We had one conversation really on the way back home, and that was about what are we going to tell these people? Because we knew we were sick enough that we needed to go to the hospital. What are we going to tell these guys? Because we worked in the hospital. These were our friends. We knew everybody. Right. What are we going to tell these people happened to us? We didn't want to lie. I mean, we were both truthful, and that was important that we tell the truth. But we knew that if we said that we saw a UFO the size of Walmart, that they'd be shipping us off, for a psych evaluation, right. And very likely we'd be discharged from the military, and it would be a disruption to my future career plans and Toby's too. So we agreed. We made a pact that our story would be that we went to bed feeling funny, feeling strange, not feeling kind of out of sorts, and woke up sick. And just decided to come back. And we were so sick, we didn't care about a $10 Kmart tent, a cooler, because we left everything there.
Oh, you did? You just jumped in the car and left.
Probably still there today. I don't know. But we left everything there because we didn't care. We were happy to be out there with our lives. But aside from making that agreement about what we'd say, we really didn't have anything to say. And that's just really contrary to human nature.
Who was the first person that you told at the hospital? Was it a superior or was it just a peer?
It was, the first person I told was my wife, who discovered I had 103 fever, helped me get undressed, helped me get in some cool bath water and change clothes. And then she took me to the hospital and gave me some aspirin. And we got to the hospital, and everybody in the hospital squadron knew we were making this trip. I mean, these were all our friends. And I got to say, medical people take care of their own. We were treated really very well. And we were ushered into separate treatment rooms. We weren't together in a treatment room, which was unusual because that tied up two rooms, and that was odd. And I had the most thorough medical examination of my life. It took about 45 minutes, but I had two doctors. And one of the doctors that I knew very well was like, Terry, what did you do? What did you guys do? How did you get burned like this? And I said, Doc, I don't know. And he said, well, didn't you use sunscreen? Were you on a spit out in the middle of the sun being rotated to get, because I was burned under my arms, the soles of my feet, my scalp. I mean, everywhere I was burned. And I've got no explanation for that. He had no explanation for that.
Even under, not get too personal, was it everywhere? Like even under underwear everywhere, or is it just mostly
every spot on my body?
Wow. Yeah, that would be hard to explain.
Yeah, and he had no explanation for it.
Right.
And
well,
the burns to her eyes, yeah, we don't know how that happened.
They burned to your retina and stuff like that. Was everything?
Not the retina. We
just
had
more
what was called flash burns. Yeah, it's a sunburn to the cornea of your eye.
Yeah, cornea. Yeah,
so just painful.
Yeah,
but nothing permanent.
Oh my gosh.
Thankfully.
Well, for everybody just tuning in or been tuned in for a while, this is the amazing Terry Lovelace. We're talking about his workshop and lecture coming up at Contact in the Desert. He wrote a book, Incidents at a Devil's Den, a true story by Terry Lovelace, Esquire. And we're going to take just a 1-minute break. because we want to do a little quick commercial for Contact, but get your tickets because it's coming up very quickly, and a lot of great speakers are going to be there, as you can see at the bottom of the screen. George Norrie, Nick Pope, Linda Moulton Howe, Eric Von Donigan, the list goes on and on, David Childress, and of course Terry Lovelace is going to be there. So don't go anywhere, we'll be right back. And then for people, leave some questions in the chat room, and then we're going to get into the story of once he I guess healed, and then 30 some years later we found something that got inserted in your leg. So we'll be right back with Truth Be Told. I'm Tony Sweet. Don't go anywhere.
When you start to ask the question, it unfolds the fabric of space itself, how it's made. What is it made of?
We're not alone in this universe. We never have been.
Alien intelligences have cohabited with us on this planet for millions of years.
We inherited the obsession from the Anunnaki. Anyone that still thinks that we're the ones that are obsessed with gold does not know enough about the true history of our species, how we came to be here, and the conditions that brought us here.
We are not unique in this universe. Extraterrestrials do exist. We are, so to say, the copies of them.
All right, we're back, and I'm Tony Sweet with Terry Lovelace. Remember, get your tickets for Contact in the Desert, June 25th through 28th. Terry's going to be doing a lecture incident at the Devil's Den, and also workshop experiencer workshop. Do you share these commonalities with abductees? Terry, thank you for doing this today. We really appreciate you being part of Truth Be Told. The story it's just so fascinating, and everybody in the chat room is definitely loving this, and they're loving how genuine you are. We're very specific, which is great because a lot of people out there that have experienced their own. Now, a lot of people, like Chris Bledsoe, he said he had a great experience, and you even said before the incident happened, you were very calm, and you were fearful after the fact, and you said you still have nightmares. Why do you feel some people have good experiences and some people don't have great experiences? They see it completely different, especially when it's the Greys.
I've talked to Chris Bledsoe at length about that, and other experiencers. I'll tell you what else I did. In the back of Incident at Devil's Den, there's an email address, and I promise that if you write to me, I will respond. If you've had a weird experience, a strange experience, maybe one you've never shared with anyone, you can share it with me in complete anonymity, and I promise I'll respond to you. And I thought, maybe I'll get 100 emails, right? And
yeah, right. How many?
I got 1,700 emails, more than as of this morning. When I had about 1,400 is when I wrote the second book, The Reckoning. And that was an epiphany for me, because that's when I found out, I thought that I was unique. I thought my experience was unique, because I really wasn't immersed in the UFO community until 2018. Prior to that, I was adverse to it. It gave me nightmares, and
right.
But now that I'm had an opportunity to connect with so many people, I find that, man, there are a lot of people out there that have had this experience. Some have, every story is a little bit different. There's none that are absolutely identical. There are a lot that are very close. But going back to your question about the difference between, I think Chris interacted with something perhaps more on a spiritual level.
That's what it sounds like to me too.
I think that that's true. And I think that ours was something different. Ours was true visitors, as Whitley would call them, Whitley Strieber would call them. And, I got to say that while I was terrified and while they hurt me, I don't think it was intentional. I think wounds that we suffered were collateral damage. You know, it wasn't a torture session. And I have flashes of memory from being inside the thing. I've never had a clear linear memory of what happened to us, no, but I've had just mostly in nightmares and in what I call intrusive thoughts, and found out later in therapy that they're called flashbacks, where I'll be cutting grass or doing something completely unrelated,
Right.
and then I'll have a vivid image flash in my mind, and the anxiety that goes along with it. So I think there are good entities. I think that there are not so good entities. But even the ones that took us, like I say, I don't think that they were malevolent. And I had a lot of anger toward them afterward. And that's mellowed somewhat over 40 years. And I think the best way to put this would be that if I had an opportunity to sit down with one of these guys now and have a cup of coffee or have a beer or something,
Right.
and have a chat, I think they'd tell me, hey, no hard feelings, man, just doing my job.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, humans do the same thing. We have animals that we raise to slaughter and eat. We have animals that we use for research, and we have people that just have sanctuaries and let these animals live out their lives, you know, being fed and treated with respect, and so yeah, we do it. So aliens, why not? They would probably.
That's a very good analogy. I like that. And you know what else? I've had a dozen people contact me and say, no, you got it all wrong. The Greys aren't this. The Greys are like this. They're
Right.
You know, and I mean, there's got to be more than one species of Gray.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
My theory about the Greys is that at least the ones that I dealt with were not living and sentient beings in the same way that you and I are.
Right.
I think that they're manufactured, you know, AI and quantum computing and a little biological material. And I think that they're made. I don't think that they're living actual beings.
Wow, that's why do you think that? Why, when you see small little creatures walking, why do you feel they were AI?
Because when we were in the craft, I have bits and pieces of being in the craft, and I refer to them in my book as drones or worker bees,
Right.
Because they were all task oriented. I mean, you never saw any slackers. There was nobody, you know, sitting around the water cooler. I mean, everybody was rushing about. And I saw an entity that was not a Gray that was in charge. I mean, I say he was in charge because, well, he was twice as tall as a Gray. He was not Gray. He was a chalkish pink in color, believe it or not. That's what his color was. He had, you know, just a bump for a nose, or two nostrils for a nose, a little bump for an ear and an ear canals, just a slit for a mouth. And his eyes were big, but they weren't exaggerated like in some of the movies. These were more like a pair of black Ray-Bans, like the wraparound variety.
Right.
And his eyes had a high black gloss to them. And he walked in front of us. I was standing in the middle of the atrium of this thing. And just like Calvin Parker, I couldn't move a muscle. The only thing I could move was my eyes. And I could rotate my eyes all around, but I couldn't turn my head or look up or look down. And across my field of vision, this guy walked, and he was, like I say, 6 foot tall. And, you know, you can tell somebody that carries themselves with an air of authority. You can just tell the guy's in charge. And I'm watching him, and he walks across my field, and he's at the far left end of my field of vision. And I have my eyes strained as far to the left as I can. And he turned, and just by chance, we locked eyes. And that was probably the most frightful thing that happened to me the whole time.
Wow. Did you understand any, like, was it all telepathic? Was it any type of language? Did you understand what was happening at that time, or, you know, when you remember back?
I have had some contact with non-human entities, but they weren't associated with this event. I've had events all my life since I was a little kid.
I was going to say, yeah, okay.
And it just goes like that. But
Yeah.
when I locked eyes with this guy, I don't know any other way to say it than he was in my head. He didn't communicate anything to me directly, but he was in my head, and he knew my thoughts. He knew my my hopes, my dreams, my plans, my wife, my family, my, child. He knew everything about me in an instant. And it's like he took a copy. I know that sounds crazy, but it until you have somebody actually, it's the biggest invasion of privacy you can ever imagine.
Right.
To have somebody in your head like that. But the whole exchange lasted just a couple of seconds, and it reminded me of when our kids were small. We had an English setter, and she'd come over and put her head in my lap, and I'd pet her on top of the head. A good girl, rubber ears, and she looked up at me with the big brown eyes, and those eyes I could read them, and they would tell me loyalty and love, and I hope she got the same from my eyes.
Right.
But we each knew our respective places. She knew that I was the alpha.
Right.
And in this exchange with this ET, I was the dog. I felt just absolutely inferior, mentally, physically, emotionally, on every level. Whatever this thing was, wherever he came from, it is 500 rungs up the evolutionary ladder from us.
Did you ever feel, I know you had emotionally inferior, but did you ever feel any type of spiritual equalness? I know that's kind of maybe something you've either thought about, didn't think about, but did you feel like anything spiritual at all?
The spiritual thoughts that I had were the religious anchors that I grew up with, that I would rely upon as coping mechanisms.
Okay.
A way to process things.
Right.
But as far as associating these things with spirituality, I never really thought about that until I heard that I read in the 80s that the Catholic Church maintains 3 large observatories. And they actively recruit and hire physicists, astronomers, cosmologists. And they have a observation place that's been around since the 17th century in northern Italy. They have one in California, and they have one in South America. And the people that man them contribute to peer-reviewed papers in scientific journals. And they're
interesting.
So I wonder what that interest is. And I know that Chris Bledsoe and I had a deep conversation about this. And
I would have loved to hear that one.
it was interesting.
Yeah,
it was interesting. He's on a deeper spiritual level than I am. I'm just an initiate, but I feel that there is definitely a supernatural component to this. Not paranormal, but there's a spiritual component to it. Absolutely.
Well, just because of time, I want to jump ahead to 2012 when you fell and you went to the emergency room and you found these inserts.
Yes. When I the problem wasn't related at all to the implants. The problem was I had a Baker's cyst in back of my patella, back of my kneecap. Completely unrelated. And the Baker's cyst is benign. It goes away in a couple of weeks. It's painful to walk. Take some Tylenol and get over it. But just by chance, they found these things in my leg. And the radiologist made a comment. He said, well, you had to be in some kind of accident. And then he came down because the technician called him down. He was annoyed to come down, but once he looked at my x-rays, he's like, he says, you had to have been in an accident of some sort. He says, there has to be a scar in your leg because you can't take an object this size and violate the integrity of the skin and place it this deep into fascia and tissue and there not be a scar. That's just impossible.
Right.
And I said, Doc, I don't have a scar there. And he didn't believe me. He said, well, it probably happened when you were a kid. You don't remember it. And he examined my leg for 3-4 minutes and looked absolutely confounded and said, I don't find a scar. And I said, well, doctor, let me ask you, how often is it that you find an object like this in a human body and there not be a corresponding scar? And he said, never. He said, I've been a radiologist for 23 years and I can't account for how this thing above your knee got into your body.
Wow.
And he says, as for the things below your knee, and then he popped those in the view box up for me to see. He said, this floret pattern is bone. It's bone tissue. But he said, I've never seen bone tissue spontaneously sprout in the middle of a muscle multiple times and then arrange themselves in a symmetrical pattern. He says, I just don't know what that is. I still got stuff in my leg, and I think that.
Did they ever remove it at all?
No, I wanted to have it removed immediately, and that's a little bit longer story than probably the time we got. But in a nutshell, what it was because of my cardiac history, I've had a couple heart attacks.
Oh, got it.
Risk versus benefit analysis. No, I couldn't get a cardiac clearance letter from a cardiologist.
So, okay, just in the few minutes we have left, I have to ask, did you ever try, once out of the military, try to reach out to Toby and to find out if he, ever talked about it to other people or on the same path as you, or no?
Yes, I tried several times. We made contact with his wife, and she came to Michigan, and we had dinner together, her and her new husband. Toby and she separated shortly after they arrived in Japan, and my friend Toby didn't do well. My friend Toby, and I want to be clear here that I had my struggles too, especially with night and with sleep, because I think once you've had an experience like we've had, sleep is hard to come by, and you feel vulnerable when you close your eyes because, that's when the monsters come in.
Mm-hmm.
And Toby developed a problem with alcohol, which was curious because he wasn't a drinker before this incident.
So he's just trying to find some way to numb.
Yeah.
Mm.
He passed away in September of 2007.
Oh,
we were never able to make connections.
That's too bad.
That's kind of a long story. I tell the entire story in the second book, The Reckoning.
Well,
it's kind of interesting.
Well, we're definitely going to have you back, and that's these two books right here, Devil's Den, The Reckoning. Your story is amazing. Like you and Chris both you're, first of all, you're great storytellers, because you hear a lot of people that have incident, but they don't tell the story with passion and with just the heart to express what really happened. So I really appreciate that. And I know people need to get their tickets so they can go to Contact in the Desert and see you in these lecture and workshop. But I'd love to have you back and talk more just because of time. But and maybe after Contact we can get you back and go into a little more detail on in those 35 years or now 40 years. I think, was it 40? Yeah, 40.
It'll be 45 years next June.
Oh my gosh. And just, and talk about, more experiences. Do you feel like they've returned? And, have you been abducted again? Because sometimes that happens often, that they come back to see how you're doing.
I've had an experience as recent as April 16, 2019. I
Wow.
would be delighted to come back
Yeah.
and share with your wonderful audience. And please, if you can, please come to Contact in the Desert June 25th through 28th.
Yeah.
Come to my workshop, even if you think you've been abducted, if you don't think you've ever been abducted, but if you think you've had maybe a disturbing dream from your childhood, from age 4 to 6, that you just can't get out of your mind, come to my workshop.
I love it. Well, thank you, Terry, so much. And where do people go? I know we were mentioning Contact, but where do people go to find more information about you? And
Sure. My books are on Amazon, and they're available. Devil's Den is available in Kindle, paperback with photographs and pictures of the X-rays, and an audiobook. And then The Reckoning is available in Kindle and paperback, and it's being made into an audiobook now.
Wonderful. Well, we appreciate you, and please come back. We're going to get you back. And everybody in the chat room, we love that you guys participated. And sorry I didn't get to your questions, but my first time I've got to speak with Terry before, so this is great to hear his story. And but the conversation will continue. So I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Thank you guys so much. We'll see you next week right here on Truth Be Told. Take care. Bye. All right. Thank you so much, Terry. That was amazing.
Well, thank you, Tony. It was